Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Above My Pay Grade. I'm back here with Green Collar Finance, Lawrence from Green Collar Finance. Excuse me. We did a podcast a couple weeks ago for Thanksgiving with Jaime, and I wanted to bring him back on because I had a lot more questions for him, and we didn't get to him in that podcast. We tried to keep it to an hour or so. But one of my first questions, first of all, thanks for coming back on. One of my first questions for you is, my main premise, and I'm not the smartest guy in the world, and there's people who can give me analytics and all this kind of stuff, but the markets as a whole, meaning the stock market, basically any market out there, I feel like is rigged and has been rigged to some degree by central banks and governments. And because of that, the valuations are astronomical. Do you agree? Do you agree with that premise?
I do. One of the big things I always look at is who is able to pull the levers that control the liquidity in the market that allows those evaluations to go where they go. It's the US government.
So, U.S. government, the Federal Reserve.
Correct.
And they're incentivized for them to, because those valuations directly correlate to tax receipts, right? Valuations go up, people can loan more money, they can lever off of that underlying equity. Not to mention when people sell, the government gets a cut of that. And the government's in debt and they need that cut. So since they're rigged, right, I feel like everything, at least to me, and I'm sure you can give me, certain asset classes, and I can give you a couple too, but when we're talking about traditional 401k, what people do is dollar cost average, set it and forget it. They just keep investing and they put it away every month. That whole premise to me seems illogical now, meaning if it's so overvalued, and that doesn't mean that it can't get more overvalued. I tell people that it's like, just because something's overvalued, and let me contextualize overvalued. Lawrence and I could look at something, and values to a certain degree is discretionary. Lawrence and I can look at a painting. Lawrence can say, "Hey, that painting looks like it's worth $5. I wouldn't even pay $5 for it." And I would say, that there is this rare painting from whoever. I don't know painters, but whoever. I'll pay $150,000 for it. So value, to a certain degree, is subjective. But when we're talking about stocks, we've all watched Shark Tank, right? And we see Kevin O'Leary, Mr. Wonderful, ask the person pitching the product, how much are you selling? What is your profit? So if you're selling these and you're not making a profit, you don't have a business, right? So what's your profit? And they normally don't pay more than 10x profits. So they make 100,000 in a year. They won't value the company more than 1 million. So that's the valuation. The valuation of stocks, this is not the profitability, has been going up over the last 40 years by 3%. This is according to Dave Collum, one of my favorite analysts, but it's been going up by 3%. And the question is, my question for you, Lawrence, is there a ceiling, and are we at that ceiling? And then what happens when we have valuations at all-time high? We got this everything bubble with the government simulating everything bubble. We got housing, education, we got stocks, we got basically every asset class is just to the moon valuations. What happens when that crashes? Because it can't, the U.S. government, in my opinion, can't survive if it crashes and they let it just sit there and wallow in a free market takeover and it go back to reality. So how do you think the U.S. government will respond? And do you think we're headed towards that direction of, since we're overvalued, we're going to come back to reality?
So I don't know that it'll come back to reality the way that we would hope that it might. When talking about evaluations, yes, they're at all-time highs. That's because with the value only growing at a certain percentage, as you pointed out, the price has gone exponentially by the amount of liquidity in the market. Well, who put that liquidity into the market? How do they get it? We either buy our own debt or other countries buy our debt. And so now that other countries are not buying our debt at the rate in which they were, they're actually selling it in order to start a BRICS currency. we have to look at, like, do I think it's going to come down? Yes, it kind of has to. I'm very much a believer in the reversion to the mean, in which if you looked at the stock market, look at a chart. I don't care which index, whichever one you'd like. At what point in history, with it going up directly straight up in the air, does it not come back down and revert to the mean?
I would say potentially. It did come down in 09, but liquidity, we were in a recession and liquidity was jammed in there. Same thing with 2020.
Correct.
No one was even working. Jammed money in there, started jacking it up and up and to the right again.
Correct. And so it jacked it up. We haven't come down all the way.
Agreed. But the question is, can the government survive?
The only way that it could survive is if for some reason other countries got very interested in our debt all of a sudden.
Yeah, because like a recession, for those of us who are savers, for those of you who are saving for a house, for prices to come down and you're smart with your money, now you can buy things on sale. Great. But the government can't let things go on sale because for a lot of reasons, but number one, government spending doesn't go down in a recession. It's the same or more. And then their deficit goes up because they're taking less in tax receipts. So the real problem, and this is why I'm in such a conundrum when it comes to investing, unless it's Bitcoin, of course. But because everything seems like it's on the sandy ground of government liquidity and the money itself. And so when we're talking about valuations, we're doing it in this measuring tool, money, that is changing. Like the value of it's changing. And I think I might have said this on the last podcast, but it's like building a house with a measuring tape that just changes what an inch is every single time. So it's going to look pretty weird, and it's probably not going to be structurally sound. And eventually that house is going to collapse. And I don't think the U.S. government and the currency is going to collapse overnight. I'm not one of those people who think we're going to have hyperinflation tomorrow. I think other countries will have it way before us because we're the world reserve currency. I do think that we're going to live in this orchestrated, financially engineered economy. So you could look at a product, or you could look at a company, you could look at fundamentals, and you could say, looks great to me. And then the government could change the rules like they did with GameStop, if you followed that at all. Or they did with banks during 08. They said, hey, I know all of you who are looking at these banks and you knew their fundamentals were off. And so you shorted them. Shorting is now illegal. So
for you,
when they do that, you're like, okay, I know in the long pole in the tent is this whole system is going to fail because it's not based on sound economics. It's based on the whims of politicians, and the whims of politicians are more power and control. What do you think about that?
So I agree. I think a lot has to do with the amount of money that goes into those politicians, but we'll leave that as it be. I think that you're exactly right in that eventually that bubble does have to pop. Now, how, when, where? You're assuming we're already not in a recession.
I actually think we are. But my point is the government has to reinflate it. That's the problem.
Correct.
Like, it's not that it has to pop, because it will pop because people run out of money, but the government doesn't. And so they will reinflate the bubble to even bigger size. That's my ultimate problem.
And the thing is, though, at this point, that reinflation of the bubble isn't making it directly to the American people, as the COVID tax cuts and all these other things are coming out of the market. And so the U.S. Census Bureau, like the housing policy, they just did a bureau census of it, and 30% of adults across the U.S. are not current and are behind on their rent and mortgages. Florida is actually 40%.
Did you hear that, folks? 30%? That's nationwide?
That's nationwide.
Behind on their mortgage or their rent. Do you know what it was in 08?
No. Not off the top of my head,
Or
but it's one of
I
those
guess it
leading
was 07.
indicators when they look at like, hey, we're at all-time credit card consumer debt,
Yes.
while also behind on housing. And we're also looking at a period of time, like in the next 12 months, where the government has to refinance 25 to 30% of its national debt, totaling close to $8 trillion.
At much higher interest rates.
At mucho higher interest rates, especially when we're close to a zero interest rate environment.
Yes. Which, again, folks, I always tell people, just because, so if as interest costs go up, it doesn't mean their other expenses go down. They don't balance a budget. They just spend more deficit money, which means worse inflation, more M2. So, like, I guess my question is, like, I think sooner rather than later, what we're going to have is just like Japan, we're going to have yield curve control because the federal government cannot afford high interest rates. To give you an example, for you folks at home, we have 34 trillion in debt. If we had to refinance that and we were running inflation at 10%, people want a real interest rate. So they're going to want 10 to 11% on their money if they're going to loan it to the government. So 10% of 34 trillion, 3.4 trillion a year in interest only. And we take in about 4 trillion in taxes. So you can see how that's a big problem. Government can't afford that. And so who's going to be the buyer of the debt to keep the interest rate down? It's going to have to be the Fed. So Bank of Japan owns half of all Japanese debt. It's going up. And I think the Federal Reserve is going to have to do the same thing. And then when this bubble pops, in my opinion, it's going to be, since they have to run such massive deficits, and then the government and the Congress people are going to go, I've got this great idea. I don't know why I haven't thought of this before. Why don't we hand out stimmy checks to everyone because they're having a hard time paying off their house? Because if we have 30% of people who are going to get evicted from their house, not happening. It is not happening. So what they're going to do is come up with some plan. You can't evict people. These landlords are evil. We're going to take over the housing by the state, whatever it is. But all of it involves printing ungodly amounts of money. Way more than so it's inflation. That's, I guess, my assumption is like we are going to have persistent, disgustingly high inflation, and then they're going to lie about it. And so all these assets that you can invest in, like stocks, they're going to have a hard time actually making a profit in an inflationary world. Their valuation might go up, but their profit, they're going to be 250x earnings or whatever, like grossly overvalued historically. And I don't know. I think that the system, if you were to fix the system, if you were king for a day, how would you, do you think this system itself, like the fiat currency we have today, can be fixed with the debt to GDP that we have? Or do you think the whole thing needs to crash and burn and then we come up with a new system?
I think that the vast majority of the things that would have to happen, people, especially in political places, don't want to happen. And it's not because of them. It would have to take a reform of the Social Security program, Medicare, veteran benefits across the board. We'd have to change because the statistic is 40% of America actually doesn't pay taxes. And it's not because they don't pay in. They get back the same, if not more, than what they paid in.
Right.
And so they'd have to reform how they would do that. They'd also have to reform, obviously, those social programs. Our current interest just on our debt actually passes our entire military spending.
Mm-hmm.
All of it.
The most powerful military ever in the world. We pay more in interest on our debt than funding that military.
Oh, and by the way, just like I stated earlier, 25 to 30% of it's getting ready to be refinanced at much higher rates than we paid for them originally through quantitative easing. And so could we? Yeah. But there's going to be a lot of changes in how that we interact as a society on individual consumer level. It's hard to hold a government accountable when you do not hold yourself accountable and you don't know what accountability looks like in the first place. I've talked to people every single week from all over the country. Some of them are stationed all over the world. And until we can hold ourselves accountable, how do we even know what that looks like to hold accountable for our political parties and the other things that are going into effect? I think if the government was honest, truly, I'm going to try not to swear, about how screwed we are, and we were actually honest about where we're at in this economic cycle, then I think the American people would choose to come together to help fix the problem. Because if they don't, we're not going to have an America in the way that we see it now, or something even close.
Well,
that's my personal opinion.
Well, some people think, like, one of my opinions on debt and spending from the government is that it does something to the psyche of the consumer as well. So, and you have to know thyself, right? So obviously spending more than you make is idiotic. Okay. But then we got these people, like me, who are thinking about the economy and thinking about investing, thinking about the future. And all things being equal, I'd rather consume today than tomorrow. All things being equal. But why would I delay consumption today for the future? Is because I know that the future is going to be better if I do that. Now, if I assume the future is going to be worse, then I want to consume all I can today. I want to spend all I can today. And people, this is the difference between, and no one understands what saving is. Like, saving you used to be able to make money, put it in a bank, and know that money would, and in reality, in a free market economy, it should buy you more in the future, because capitalism drives marginal costs down. But we know that we can't do that. We cannot put money in the bank, save for 5 years, and expect. Look at those people who are trying to save for a down payment on a house. Keeps going further and further out of reach as they're saving more and more money. And that 20% down payment on a house is getting more and more unachievable. And I think a lot of people are realizing that, and they're kind of I don't know the word, but they're fatalistic, I guess. They think the future is not going to be better than the present. So why not consume now? If the little things bring me joy, like Starbucks and all that kind of stuff, I'll never be able to afford a house. So do you think that that's a reality of the system that we're in, where the government is debasing your labor? So you can work twice as hard and the government's going to print 4 times as much. So great, you work twice as hard, but you just were debased by 4x. Congratulations. Do you think that that's part of that fatalistic mindset of, like, well, the future's going to be worse, so why should I care? Do you think that's affecting Americans today? In your experience talking to them on the phone, you just a little quick background on you. You talk to service members on a regular basis, give them financial advice, etc. Okay, so is that what you're seeing when you talk to people?
Yes. So a lot of people don't have a clear vision of what that would look like, and so they assume that things are going to get so bad. I will also say that the majority of these people that I talk to have not walked around inside of an older person home or some of these other places and sat down and talked and looked at the livelihoods of someone who can't afford to live at 80 years old, also can't physically go work to provide that. Because as you're talking about, yeah, they're just going to print more money, but the same thing goes towards the inflated cost of everything. And then those people that only are living off of Social Security, there's nothing there.
Yeah.
They can't buy anything. There's nothing there.
Exactly.
And so you're right. Like, there's this fatalistic mentality of, like, oh, well, the whole world's going to be gone anyway. And so I might as well have 17 motorcycles and this, that, and the other. And I'm like, cool. So people have also said that for, like, hundreds of years at this point too. I'm not saying it's not wrong. I'm also not saying it's right now.
Right.
And so, like, maybe we should consider putting something for the future just in case.
Right.
Some people get their wits about them in the next, because the future is a long time from now for some people, and it's not long for others. It's 1 second at a time, or it's 30 years at a time.
Sure.
And so what do we look at? Well, the best case based off of back data is we probably should at least have some money in retirement so that we don't have to try to get that job at 85 because we're not going to be able to.
Right.
So
Yeah.
what do we do? Do we blindly not try to improve our position?
Right.
To fight that battle as it comes? Or do we enjoy? I enjoy small things. Absolutely. I love playing golf. It's my thing. And so do we enjoy those things right now? Yeah, some. But you can play a lot of golf when you don't have 3 jobs.
Right.
A lot of it. And you can do that every day. And so you're right. We have this fatalistic mentality, like nothing's going to be okay. But what happens if it is?
Yeah.
What happens if the best case scenario happens in that case?
What
then
would you consider?
Then you have a lot of nothing. You have some stuff now, then a whole lot of nothing later.
So we're going to end this podcast with some hope, and that's what I do not like prescribing a problem and not talk, because what's the point of talking about a problem if there is no solution? You're just wasting your breath. And I do have a couple of solutions that we'll talk about. I've talked about many times, one of them being Bitcoin. But things of value, regardless of the thing that you're trading them in, whether that's dollars or euros or whatever, they still have value. That's somewhat subjective, so a stock can be valuable. But like everything got repriced in Weimar Germany after that hyperinflation. Argentina's going through hyperinflation for all intents and purposes. So when you say, what if it all works out? What would you say? Because I think it's a guarantee. Love to get your thoughts on that. 100% guarantee. And maybe I'll leave a 0.0001% chance that the government all of a sudden gets their act together and people want to pay more in taxes and not get Social Security or any benefits. But I just don't think that's going to happen. So for all intents and purposes, 100% guarantee that the government will continue to debase the currency at an exponential rate every single year until it explodes. I got a couple slides here that Lawrence and I are going to talk through. So what I mean by exponential rate, our debt isn't growing like this linear line you see. Our debt is growing at an exponential rate. What does that mean? When, like Lawrence was just describing, when we have to refinance our debt at a higher interest rate, we don't just pay higher interest and not pay other things. We just take out more debt to pay that interest. That means we have more debt. That means we have to pay higher interest the next year, and thus it grows exponentially. And this is, if you don't understand economics at all, and there's most people in the government, unfortunately, are what they call modern monetary theorists, which means they believe in fairy tales. They believe that you can reap without sowing, that things just come out of the ground, and labor and energy isn't scarce. So they don't believe in scarcity, essentially. So they believe government deficits don't matter. But anyone with a brain can look at this chart and go, okay, red line, debt going exponentially up. Income or GDP not going exponentially up. That's a problem. And Lawrence and I were talking before we even started recording. Like, even if you're an MMTer, like if you're one of these people who believes in modern monetary theory, you at least know that there is a level of government debt that's not good. And because why would we collect taxes if government debt didn't matter? And government deficits didn't matter. Where everyone just spend their money and the government would print it and then pay for what the government needs. So they know that to be true. So with a graph like this, what would you say to my 100% probability that the government will continue, this red line will continue to go up parabolically, and the blue line will grow, but in a linear fashion, not exponentially? What would you say to that?
I don't disagree. Again, it's the spread on that's insane.
Yeah,
but it really is. And
notice
so,
when it started, folks, 1970 here down at the bottom. You know, when that significance of that date came off the gold standard, but it's neither here nor there.
Coincidence. It's something to consider, and 1978 there is when the 401k was created. November 6th of 1978, actually. And so, yeah, everything's going great from then. You know, they come off the gold standard. We got a bunch of fake money into the markets, and here we are.
So what's the fairy tale? Is there a, how does this end well? Within the system we're in today, can it end well?
The only way it can end well is if we come to an agreement on balancing a budget and figuring out a way to pay back, you know, that debt. It was said recently, like, it's like you making $34,000 a year, you spend $46,000 a year, and you hold $236,000 of debt. And you add to that deficit every year. That's per house, by the way.
And that's unproductive debt. That's not like a house.
No, that's unsecured. Unsecured. It's just out there. It's like I got a personal loan in thin air. And so if that's in every household, by definition for what we have as a national debt, the only way to have to figure out is we got a Dave Ramsey a little bit, which I'm not a fan, but he's really good at people getting to from zero to a positive net worth of some sort. And so figuring out ways that we can come to our senses. That's the only way. And is it likely going to happen? No, because people don't like to be uncomfortable.
So I would agree with you. That's very unlikely. Like, I think the best option we have is to create a parallel. That's what typically happens with hyperinflation, is if it happens slow enough, it's not Weimar Germany. That was like, I don't know, 2,000% losses or whatever per year. Because at the end of the day, you can survive that, but societies typically don't. And they don't because the society breaks down and no one can get paid and all that kind of stuff. But if you can get a parallel economy where people are just slowly jumping ship over to this other system, like in Argentina, people have been dollarizing, right? So as soon as they get paid in Argentinian pesos, swap it into dollars. And they have 150% inflation there. And it's not anarchy, but the economy's not running well. And they just have this big election, et cetera. So it doesn't always have to be like World War Z. And I try to, you know, if that's going to happen, it's going to happen. Okay. So I'm talking in the world of, we still have free markets. We still have markets in general, and people aren't killing each other in the streets. This system is going to fail. And and the reason I say that is for us to get Dave Ramsey on our economy. If you run the numbers on that, it's no Social Security, 1/4 of military budget. And the problem is U.S. government's 20% of GDP. So this blue line would actually drop.
Correct.
Significantly. So it's like mathematically, and I think it's 120% debt to GDP, where it's like mathematically impossible to get out of, because there's like in your life, if you make $100,000 a year and you have, 1.2 million in credit card debt, it's mathematically impossible to get out of that, because unless you hit the lotto, you're like, well, I plan on making 500,000 a year next year. Well, how's that going to happen? Well, I just plan on it. Well, yeah. That's a strategy, but it doesn't, that's hope. So yeah. That's like, with that in mind, like if you humor me for a second and you were to assume there's 100% probability, the question is, we don't know when, but we are starting to see cracks in the dam, right? And I think this started in 2008, where we didn't really fix the problem. We just printed money and pushed the debt up to the sovereign level. And I think the bank bailout in 2008 was like 700 billion. That's like chump change today. We've added 700 billion to the debt in the last month, I think.
That's correct.
Yeah, so it's insane.
Our current rate is adding 11 trillion to the debt just this year.
Yeah, so it's like mind-boggling, the amount of money. I did a video the other day. I hit mute sometimes accidentally. Joe Biden put this tweet out, and he said, "Hey, if we raise billionaires' taxes by 25%, we will collect 40 billion a year over the next 10 years, so $400 billion. And conservatively, we're going to add over the next 10 years 20,000 billion to our debt." And so it, like, this is why my biggest warning to people is like, this system is going to fail. And if you understand how the system works, you will get into assets the government can't print. And we'll get more into that. So I want to hit the next slide here. So one of the things that boggles my mind is valuations, right? So what has happened, and I don't know if you know when the ETF was invented. I think it's like less than 2 decades old. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. I don't remember the exact date off the top of my head, but yeah, it's relatively new concept.
So we have these ETFs, exchange traded funds, which are kind of like mutual funds wrapped up into a stock ticker. My point is, most people who are investing today, who have a 401k, Roth IRA, excuse me, the way they invest is every month they put a percentage of the paycheck in, and they put it into an ETF typically because they're low cost, et cetera, which isn't a bad strategy. However, like I said at the beginning, valuations on stocks have been going up. So it's the same stock for all intents and purposes, same earnings ish, give or take, but the valuation of that earning, so the price is the earnings of that per share. There's a lot of different ways to price a stock, but what the earnings of the company are, but the premium people are willing to pay for that those earnings has been going up by 3% over the last 40 years. I think because of dropping interest rates. And if you look here, that red line is M2, which isn't like as totally scientific. We don't know all the money in the world, which is another thing. If you ask the Fed how much currency is out there in the world, they don't even know. But M2 money supply is a good, somewhat good derivative of it. And you see, as this goes up, what else goes up? The S&P 500. So if you're giving somebody like me who has cash flow, who wants to put it somewhere, and he's looking at something like this and saying, hey, stocks don't go up. They go up because money printing goes up. And so it's better than holding cash in general over the long term to put it in something like this. But it seems like the S&P has become more of a savings vehicle to just preserve purchasing power than it is an investment, because they're not earning more money per se. They're not becoming more productive. They're getting more liquidity because of the Fed printing money. Do you agree with that statement? And looking at a chart like this, what would you say to somebody who's a little trepidatious about investing in the stock market?
Well, what I will say is it's going up. So with all that you said, that's correct. By the way, I looked up the ETFs were created in 1993. The first one was actually SPY, which is an ETF ticker by spiders, which is the SP 500 for all of my listener folks. And so what we have to look at is we have inflation. What are the other options? Stagflation, in which it sticks around for a while. Okay. Or you have deflation. Deflation, the prices start to go down, in which unemployment starts to go up. Out of the last 7 out of 7 recessions, the unemployment rate crosses the 24-month moving average, which has just happened. And so what we have to consider is, like, you're right. Yes, it is like a savings vehicle to try to keep up with having some more money than you have sitting inside of a bank. I was just talking to someone recently that had a much older portfolio, and he was so excited about when he used to be able to get CDs at 15% interest. It's like, sounds amazing. It's not around anymore. But we're in a rising interest rate environment. And so, yes, you're going to continue to be able to print money and adding it to the economy to allow that to continue going up without or unless GDP begins to grow. Because as companies become more effective and are able to produce more at a faster rate that provides more value to the people in the economy, then it can continue to grow. But we can't just print and add more money to the system and call it growth. No, the price went up, But why'd the price go up? Look at your car. Is it actually worth 30, 40% more than it was 3 years ago?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah,
when you go to buy one, no. Heck no. Let me tell you though.
exactly.
Not at all. I love my Camry. But
I knew you drove a Camry or a Accord.
I have to because I drive so freaking far. I drive 82 miles each way to work. Otherwise, I'd be driving a freaking Tundra, trying to burn some gas. I'm a Toyota fan, so I drive a sedan too.
Save some money on gas.
It is what it is. That and I don't want to drive a Jeep 82 miles to work, so that sounds freaking horrible. But is it actually? And that's one of the biggest things I thought of, like as you were talking, is like how much value is brought to that car.
Right.
But the price went up.
And that's the mind, like that's the mind, like the mind space I've been in the last couple years is like, you know, the genesis for me was 2020. And then I started researching what money was. And like, it's kind of like playing Monopoly. And then all of a sudden, instead of starting with 500 Monopoly dollars, you start with 1,000, but everyone else starts with 1,000. So you feel good, but everything else is going to be more expensive. And so it's I kind of look at like the M2, if the pie keeps growing of M2 in the money supply, how much of that money supply do you have? And if you have less and less of that money supply, meaning you are not keeping up with the debasement of the currency, in the long run, M2 is not directly correlated to, or debasement is not directly correlated to inflation, because they debase about 7% a year, and that's compounding. But if your pie piece there, your purchasing power is going down as a percentage of the growth, then you are losing. And so even if, let's just say M2 went up by 7 and your stock portfolio went up by 5, that continues to happen, you're going to lose in the long run. You're actually not even keeping up with debasement. It makes you feel good because you have 5% more currency units, but you have this unit bias, and in reality, it's buying you less. It's not keeping up with the debasement itself. So I don't know how like your average person is going, like the person who's paycheck to paycheck, and we're kind of seeing it now, and you kind of mentioned it with rent and home payments, etc. They're not even thinking about investment. They're just thinking about food and being able to afford their house, which they're not even able to do. Your average person isn't even able to keep up with inflation, because the last thing to go up with inflation is wages. Wages rarely, if ever, keep up with inflation.
Correct.
So I guess my point is with this chart is there seems to be a little bit of tomfoolery going on. It's not, yes, the number is getting bigger on the screen, so it makes me feel good, but it's not actually more productivity that's driving that. It's more money. And they're printing this much, and the valuation went up this much. So I actually lost in the end. I don't know if you agree with that. Do you agree with that?
No, I do to an extent, because again, like it's all going to be based off of like the value compared to the price, and then you're looking at what does that price buy and what does that value actually buy. And so that's what I go back to the car thing. Like, cool, the price went up, the value stayed the same. It's a little bit more valuable to me,
right?
But maybe not the next person. And so, like, at what point does that balance happen where it's like, well, it's going to happen? It's happening now. People aren't buying as much. We have a record high on cash sitting in money market accounts money that we've had in a long time, because you're able to get these safe returns, but the return is still probably under real inflation.
Which I have a slide on that too.
Real inflation. I know you do. I should say like held off. I was like,
yeah. So, I mean, this is pretty correlated. The currency, and those of you who watch my channel for a long time, you know, like they keep printing more currency. It doesn't always directly correlate. Like M2 money supply doesn't directly correlate to inflation, but in the long run, more currency in circulation less purchasing power of that currency. And Lawrence and I were talking before we started recording. If you're not familiar, shadow stats, one of the things the government does, and it's always for their benefit, is they change the way they measure CPI, consumer price inflation. And so when you're seeing data from these analysts and you're seeing like inflation adjusted prices, like market returns, et cetera, because let's just say inflation's 5 and your market return was 10, inflation adjusted return would be 5. So when you're seeing those numbers, they're basing that off of government advertised inflation, which one might argue that that's a conflict of interest, because the person giving the report card to the government on what their money printing is doing is the government, right? So there's a guy out there, I can't remember his name. Anyways, he has his website. He measures inflation the same way we used to measure it in the 1970s, a lot simpler, et cetera, et cetera. And point being, it's higher, significantly higher than what the government is advertising today. So every single time the government kind of jerry-rigged CPI and they're like, actually, the way we're going to measure it this time is by saying 2 + 2 is 5, or whatever they decide to do. It's always for the benefit of making it look lower than it is. There's a lot of things that are indexed to inflation. A big one would be Social Security. So if they're trying to get out of the debt they're in, the government, and they actually advertise inflation truly for what it is, they got a big problem, because everything that they're paying out is indexed to this inflation number. So what if they just lie and make it lower? So so the blue line is what it used to be, or the way it used to be measured. And you see we topped out, it's about average 5 to 6% more than the government is advertising today. And so what does that mean? When we're talking 8% average returns, it's really 2 or 3% average returns in the stock market if we're measuring inflation the way we used to. But my point is, I think this is one of the things the government's going to have to do, because I don't think they can not print gargantuan amounts of money. Not for you, because they don't care about you. Their debt, like, the government has to be able to borrow money. If tomorrow you said government can't borrow money, we have to balance a budget, the government would not run, because we spend $2 trillion over what we take in taxes. Okay, so a lot of things would have to be cut, etc. But my point is, for just the simply the government debt alone, they have to print gargantuan amounts of money because we need higher tax receipts, etc. And they're gonna have to lie, obfuscate the truth about inflation. Do you agree with that, Lawrence? Do you think government inflation numbers can be trusted, or any reference point have any reference point to reality?
Well, I mean, let's look at just like last year when they decided to go like, oh no, inflation's point to point 1 year rolling now, 12 months instead of 24 months now. We changed it. So don't look at that. Don't look at the other crap behind there. Don't worry about it. So what you're saying is you don't want to compare today to 2 years ago when it was a quarter, if not, a fifth of what it is now.
Right.
Sure. Yeah. No, I trust you. Yeah. It's gonna go great. Everything's good. And so, yeah, they're going to have to somewhat lie to that, because if they don't, stock prices wouldn't be what they are. A lot of things wouldn't be what they are.
But isn't that just like a temporary stopgap to react?
No, it's true. But the higher those prices are, the more taxes they get to pull out of it.
Yeah. Well, in theory, one might assume, well, it's all about what the Fed's doing with interest rates.
Correct.
So if inflation was higher, people would think the Fed would have to stick to their guns a little bit longer.
And then it'd be less likely to start pumping up the market like they did, like the last month, where it gained 8%. The S&P 500, 8%.
But it's still fugazi. It's not like even if they're like, we're lying to you and therefore stocks are going higher, great, fine. But the fundamental problem is the problem. Like, it's the money.
It's still there.
So we're still playing this game of like, we're going to pretend we don't see it. and the market's calling the Fed's bluff and all this kind of stuff. But in reality, everyone knows, everyone who's paying attention knows the CPI data is rigged, right? The jobless numbers are rigged. All these things, all these numbers that people base their forecasts on, their economic forecasts on, are somewhat rigged, and they're always rigged in the government's favor. I wonder why. But
do you know how they changed how they were rating the jobless, like the job loss numbers or new unemployment?
No, go ahead.
They changed it from like actual unemployment numbers to people who filed unemployment that month or that quarter. Only once.
Yes.
And so it's like, what about all the people that are already on it? Like, no, that doesn't count. That doesn't count.
Right. But it's kind of like them talking about, well, that we're not in a recession. Well, you had two negative GDP quarters. Well, yeah, it's not a recession.
Okay. And then what happens when the yield curve finally decides to uncover, which that's a recession, but
my point is, it's like, it doesn't matter what you say. Like all these politicians, math is math, right? So like they can pretend that math isn't math, but math is math and economics is economics, and people are going to act in their own best interest. And that's why, I've been putting things on my Instagram about what Biden's been tweeting the last couple of days. And it's all like anybody and their brother knows that, that's not true. Like the economy's great and all this kind of stuff. Everyone can tell you it's not true. But my point with all of it is, the stock market are making bets on the money printer. They're not making bets on valuations. They're trying to front run inflation, is what it seems like to me. So people who are investing in stocks in 2020, in April and May of 2020, and it started to go up and to the right, no one was working, i.e. companies aren't productive. They're literally not making money. They're doing that because the federal government announced stimmy checks. And anybody who participates in the market goes, that's an inflation signal. Let's go buy some stuff that the government can't print. And people are going to take these stimmy checks and inject it into the economy, and valuations will go to the moon. That's exactly what happened. And so we're playing this weird game of like, and this is why I find it so funny. Jerome Powell, it's like a post-game interview. Like people are tuning in because he moves the market. Jerome Powell and 12 other people, like depending on what they ate that morning for breakfast, could move the market. And it's like, does that tell you the market's healthy? But like these arbiters on higher, like we're going to keep interest rates high. We're going to arbitrarily keep interest rates at this level. It's like, how in the world is that a free market? And the answer is it's not. So another slide here. Debt. I've shown some of you guys this slide before. And this is why I don't like talking about politics that much, just because it doesn't matter, right? Like the system and incentives matter. And the incentive, you will never get voted in if you say, hey, we should stop doing this, because stop doing that means immediate pain today, right now. No one's going to vote for you. So you can see no matter who it is, I think the debt went down slightly when Clinton was president, but no matter who it is, debt deficit keeps going up. And you should ask yourself, a question I ask everybody, and this is a little bit old because it says 31.7 trillion. Guess what it is now? 34. It's like, it's going up faster, right? So, and then what we spend money on, we're, 70% consumption. So what happens in a recession? Consumption goes down. So significantly. And what goes down commensurate with that is tax receipts. So, and I tell everybody what we spend money on in the federal government. Like a lot of people try to have these simple solutions to our debt problem, and they prescribe their own, the way they budget as a prescription for, how the federal government should manage their budget. I'm like, imagine you had a money printer in your basement. You're telling me you wouldn't use it? And the answer is no. I mean, I think everyone would use it. And especially if you're politically incentivized to use it. On top of that, we spend so much money on Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, and that's going to go up it's probably going to take up 3/4 of this pie chart during the baby boomers retirement ages.
And the rest of it's going to be interest, debt.
Yeah. And then you got the whole other half of the pie where you're like, well, what about the military? Deficit. You see the problem, right? You see, it's just getting bigger and bigger. And then ultimately, my biggest lesson that I try to tell people is, and this is kind of what I want to talk to you about at the end, kind of leave people with some hope, is this system and the way it works. It affects people in a very negative way. You see social consequences of it. People don't have kids. People wait to get married. Depression's at all-time highs. You remember in that, you've seen The Big Short?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, guys like us, of course, we watch it on repeat. But remember that scene where Brad Pitt's like, just don't dance, because he's talking about unemployment and what happens to suicide rates and all that kind of stuff. And yes, of course, that's bad. And one of the things I want to tell people is this system is designed, and whether it's intentionally or not, what money printing does is make richer, and the poor poorer. And it's called the Cantillon effect. It would be like you're playing Monopoly, right? And the first person to go, I hand them extra money. So they get the opportunity to buy things, assets, in the game of Monopoly, and they buy it at whatever price. And if you want to buy it from them, you have to bid more, but they have more money. They had access to the money printer first, and that is the rich. They get better loan terms, etc. They have access to money when it's printed before you get it. Therefore, they buy assets. Asset prices go up, and it prices more and more people out of things like the housing market. It financializes things like housing, because housing is a commodity. You buy it to live in. Some people invest, right? But you buy it to live in, but now it has a financial premium to it. It's not just your house, it's your piggy bank, right? So it drives up the marginal cost of all these things. And therefore, people trying to get on the first rung of the ladder is getting further and further out of reach. And they get disenfranchised, and then they get violent. That's typically what happens in society. They get disenfranchised. There is no hope. I have nothing to lose. Let's go burn down buildings downtown. I wonder where we've seen that in the last couple of years. So my question for you, I want to leave people kind of on a high note. If we were to assume that this is a 100% guarantee, that the dollar would continue to debase, I think you would agree with me that your dollar today will have significantly less purchasing power in 20 years than it does today, right?
Yeah, my $1 because I have a lot more dollars because they printed me some more.
Yes. So I guess your opinion is, how do I get access, as they're printing money, how do I get more access to that money that they're printing, so that my wedge in the pie, if they're printing M2, it goes up commensurate, or at least hopefully higher, the amount of money they're printing. And if you do that, what kind of advice do you give to people to keep up with this debasement of currency? Like somebody who's lost in the sauce, like I am, is just like everything. I'll tell you what I do after, but what do you say to people who are like, okay, what do I do? I see the problem. I agree with you on the problem. How do I fix it with them personally?
So one of the things that I always look at is obviously their personal economy. We're going to go ahead and assume that people are not just sucking down a bunch of debt themselves, but more than likely, according to statistics, they are. So fixing some of that. Because then you are not adding yourself to the problem.
Right.
And when you start taking yourself away from that equation, I personally believe that, and I've showed this illustration several times before, in which if I reset the country, everyone had $100. Okay. Someone's going to value something that someone else creates more than they value some of that money.
Right.
And they're going to give it to someone else. And now that person's going to have $120 because two people did that, or hundreds. So I believe that in this type of economy, no matter what, there's going to be a value exchange in which you value something more that someone else has or has created for you to make your life better.
Right.
Then you value the money in your pocket. And so if that is the case, you forever have access through creativity, business mindset, and some other things in order to have other people and create things, provide value to other people, that they're willing to exchange their money for yours, for what you have. And so figuring out how to get your personal economy under control, having your money continuously moving and not just sitting inside of a normal bank account, step one. Step two, look into investing. Now, granted, you're right. It's being debased. The currency is. But what can we do? We can start investing in things and assets that move in different directions, that will be a part of the inflation, that move up with inflation, because inflation is coming, and then eventually deflation, which will be kind of gross, but deflation's better when the prices are going down, but you bought it at a cheap and reasonable multiple. If my house went down in price right now, I don't care. Well, for when I own the house, but besides that, it still went up for no reason. The value didn't actually go up; the price did. And so
right. You didn't improve it. It's the same house.
I still value, like I did some improvements, but nothing to the extent in which would warrant its current price on the market. And so, yes, start investing in things that don't directly have to do with the money printer. Everything does, but the first thing you can do is fix your personal economy, because you may not even look at what a balanced version can look like until you can fully understand how to control your household and what that looks like. Because then only then you can start making steps forward.
Yeah, I very much. Yeah, I think people need to get their own spending and time preference under control. I mean, the last thing you can do is complain when you're overspending on consumer debt. But speaking of debt, you mentioned, get your debt under control. So the problem is timing this, but and I'm not a huge believer in leverage when it comes to assets, other than a house, personal, and then maybe some investment properties. But what do you say to a person who's like, well, if we're inflating, the best thing I can do is take out as much debt, non-consumer debt, but as much leverage as I can, because what inflation is going to do is inflate that debt away. What would you say to a person that says that?
So, yes, they're actually right, until inflation starts moving the other way. And now you're upside down. Think about it this way. If I went out and decided to buy a $700,000 house tomorrow, the housing market crashes by 40%. Do I still owe the $700,000?
Correct. Yes.
But it's only worth $400,000 now.
Yes.
So in the same sense, yes, you're right. It could inflate some of that debt away. But the entire point of the government is to attempt to bring inflation down, their version of it today, down. And so if that is the case, then you would be leveraging your entire existence and your money on something that will immediately start continuously lose value. And so, yeah, you're going to be holding on to more of something that is not worth as much as you paid for it originally. And you're going to be continuously paying interest on it. Look at the national debt itself.
Do you think the government can afford deflation?
No.
So that being said, if they can't afford deflation, do you think they'll let it happen? I think it'll happen organically, but then the response will be very, very inflationary, like UBI, for instance. So that's kind of the thing I'm thinking is like, I don't know what they're going to do over the next year. I just know all these signs, people not paying their debt, people not paying for their houses, interest rates going up, and then people's credit card debt going up, all this kind of stuff, all bad stuff. Which in a free market, all that would collapse. That person would go bankrupt, etc. But if it's enough people, and it will be, the government can't have that.
Correct. I actually kind of laughed. I heard a statistic today that they pooled the amount of times the word soft landing were used the most, and they were in the 6 to 8 months leading into 2000. The 6 to 8 months leading into 2007, 2008. And now we're going to have a soft landing, boys.
by the objective media.
Well, we talked
Yeah.
about this before. Like if I wanted to get a higher price on my stock, I would convince you that it's worth more. And
Yeah.
then I'm going to sell it to you.
Yeah.
Now I don't own it. So when it goes down, I didn't buy it. It's yours.
Congratulations.
There's a stock market.
So I was gonna last thought here, and then we need to do this again because I have 8,000 more questions. The bedrock of like all of my investing decisions has been that giant elephant in the room, which is government debt. Like there is no getting out of that. That drives the economy, that drives inflation, that drives, and the direction it's going to go is going to be inflationary, and then ultimately, hopefully not collapse, but fail, and then everything will have to get revalued. It doesn't mean like everything of value still exists, right? You still have your house, the sticks and bricks and all that kind of stuff. It's what you're pricing it in. And the thing that I think will upend the market and people will continue to go to is Bitcoin. And have you studied Bitcoin at all?
Some, not as deeply as you have.
So my thought on it is, number one, your first thought when somebody says Bitcoin is, oh my gosh, dude, magic internet money, as was mine. But when I started to think about money, is like money is just a belief. Like the money we use today is just belief. It's what people use to exchange value instead of bartering. And then it's what is that money itself? So you can agree that your money could be silver, but silver's really slow, etc. You could believe it could be seashells, right? But you can find seashells. There could be a lot of things. But one of the things it needs to be, unless you want it to be debased by central authority, is scarce, right? If it's not scarce, it has no value. Everything in life that we value is scarce. Our time, our energy, our children, like what we spend our energy doing and thinking about and putting our money in, which I look at money as just an energy token, right? You exchanged your energy and time for a certain amount of these tokens. Some people get more tokens for less amounts of energy, depending on what they do. And then you put that token in something that doesn't lose value. That's what most people do. They call investing. But what would happen if money is just a ledger? Like if I Venmo you, my bank talks to Venmo, Venmo talks to your Venmo, Venmo then talks to your bank. And all it is two ledgers talking to each other with a counterparty in the middle. What would happen if that ledger was not controlled by anybody? It was in the ether. It was distributed like the internet. Would that be a powerful tool? And I started to think about Bitcoin. And I was like, yeah, that'd be a very powerful tool. The question is it actually distributed? Can no one control it? Is it actually scarce? Those are questions that people learn as they study, because I don't think just saying you should invest in Bitcoin because a dollar go up or number go up on screen. But if you study it and you realize that those are the principles of Bitcoin. It is scarce. It's immutable. It can be, you could run your own node at home and verify it, and it's distributed like the internet. Like, where's the internet? Go shoot it in the face, shut it down. It's like, it's everywhere. It's computers talking to, they're all over the world, right? That's what nodes are. And so it's very close to impossible for the government to shut it down. And so I guess my point is, I think I've thought a lot about this, not the smartest person in the world, but people much smarter than me that agree with me on this. If the system's going to change, which I do think the system's going to fail, if we didn't have Bitcoin, they just invent what we have right now all over again. Because this has happened multiple times in history. You have a government declared currency, the thing overinflates. They go, oh, sorry about that. Everything gets revalued, and the whole thing starts all over again, right? But usually what people want in that revaluation is they don't trust their government. So their government goes, all right, sorry about that. We're going to back it with gold or something, right?
Chickens.
Chicken, whatever it is, they back it with something they can't print so that people trust the currency again. That goes on for 50 years, and they're like, we've been printing more dollars than chickens. Sorry about that. And then the whole system fails again. And so how do you get out of that cycle, if ever? And Bitcoin's been the only answer I've found. And it's a 21st century option that has never existed before. But if it was actually what I'm saying it is, which is all money is a ledger, and this ledger isn't controlled by anybody, and it's trusted, right? You can verify. It's not something you'd be like, I hope the money's there. Once I send money to Lawrence, it ain't mine anymore. There's no way I can get it back. I think if that exists, and it's truly what I'm saying, it'll revolutionize the world. And it's the only thing I've seen that would actually change the paradigm that we live in today, which is bang or bubble, bust, print, bubble, bust, print, and just continue that until it explodes, and then start all over again. And then it benefits the few. People get up in arms, get French Revolution style, 250 years. Like, that's a big problem, right? So what are your thoughts on that kind of technology? And do you think, if it is what I'm saying what it is, which let's just agree that it is for this conversation, do you think something like that could change the way finance works and the actual paradigm itself, the base layer, which is fiat? Do you think that could change the world if we have a distributed ledger that everyone agrees on and no one can control?
Of course, because the value exchange is strictly to person, without, now what would be interesting is trying to figure out how other people or organizations don't try to get in the middle to transact those things in order to charge you for that and control it. And now they know what you have.
Yes.
And so that would be the trick. A lot of those currencies or those type of things would have to be, want to be controlled.
Exactly.
The same way as they want to control the air that you breathe and, you know, how much
the
time
water you drink
yourself. So yes, would, for the sake of your argument, absolutely. It absolutely can. I go back to, like, it's a exchange of value, but how valuable is if I had the last drop of water, what would you exchange for that on Earth?
Everything I have.
Everything. Okay. So that's scarce, right?
Yep.
Super scarce. That's it. And so if Bitcoin is scarce, and in the case of it is an exchange in which other people are willing to exchange for on a free and open economy, peer-to-peer, direct, and the money has to be there in order to be transferred, and yes, it's very much would revolutionize. Now, will it be necessarily Bitcoin? I don't know. In all fairness, I do have some, for sure. It's a smaller portion of my portfolio, but it is part of it. But is it Bitcoin? I don't know. Is it going to be something? Yes, because it has to. We can't continue to go through these cycles, which Ray Dalio did a phenomenal job in the New World Order book, talking through and mapped them out of exactly what we're looking at from, like, the beginning of society. So,
and that's something I've tried to wrap my head around is, like, is history inevitable? Is repeating history inevitable? Have you read or heard of the book, The Fourth Turning?
No, I guess I haven't.
So it's, you've heard probably the cycle of hard times make hard men.
Yes.
Hard men. Yeah. So it's kind of that, but it's like a fourth turning is every 80 years. And it's because, and they go back. It was like World War II, the Civil War, the Revolutionary War. But you have these generations who went through something difficult, and the way they raise their kids is pretty tough, right? And then the way they raise their kids is slightly less tough, and life gets better because these hard men went through this really crappy, Great Depression, the Greatest Generation, and then you get 4 generations down the line, and I'm just like, milk just appears in the grocery store, and I can just that's how people think. Yeah. And so it comes back to reality where you need another hard time, and people have to, like, when Ray Dalio was talking about in that book, what's that video or book called again? Ray Dalio's.
I believe that one. Well, he has a lot. There are 3 of them, but there's the debt crisis, and then that one I believe is New World Order. New World Order,
yeah. So I look at that, and I'm like, if you study history, you'd see these flashing red lights, like, stop and turn around, stop doing what you're doing, because this is what happens to these empires as they fall apart. Now, I say that, and England was an empire, and England still exists. And sometimes, you know, being the world empire isn't the greatest thing in the world, because it means some good things for certain people in the economy and bad for others. But ultimately, what my goal is when I talk about this stuff is like, I recognize the problem, and I think the problem, you obviously do too, is the government money printer and all this kind of stuff. I just think the pain from that problem has been kind of a slow drip, kind of a frog in the boiling pot of water for the last 20 something years. And they turned the heat up a little too fast the last 3 years. And I think because they did, it's going to cause some problems. They printed way too much money, yada, yada, yada. And so I think the cracks in the system are going to get worse and worse and worse. And people are going to be looking for a life raft. And the life raft, the only life raft I've seen that's different, that changes the system, the paradigm completely, is Bitcoin. And I always advocate, I tell people, if you just buy Bitcoin, you don't know anything about it, I highly recommend not doing that. I recommend studying it. And when you study it, if you're a smart guy like yourself, you go, here's all the problems that I can foresee happening with a digital currency. And then you start to answer those questions. You're like, well, somebody can get in the middle of it. Somebody can hack it. All these things that most people think. And you start to answer those questions, and then usually conviction grows. But at least in my case, it has. But closing thoughts. In the next 10 years, how do you see our economy? What direction do you see our economy going next 10 years?
It truly depends, because we don't know. What I see is there's going to be a lot of dominoes that have already started to fall. And so we may have some short-term pain, and then probably the fiscal responsibility won't take over in order for us to stay there long enough to really make true change. And then we will probably come back out. And so 10-year time frame, I think we'll probably end up having gains in stock market, gains in different things. But I think in the short term, there's probably going to be there's a lot of opportunity for it to not go awesome.
Yeah.
But I think in the long term, it's going to be awesome, even if it's somewhat fake.
Okay.
For a period of time.
You think you will outperform debasement in the long term in the stock market?
Truly, I don't think that anyone can outperform when someone else wants you to not work and they hold all the levers.
Interesting.
But you can do whatever you can based off of the knowledge that you have and the actions that speak to, back testing and looking at like, hey, what has happened? Okay, well, I'll do it the best with what I have for the knowledge I have of what has happened. And as of right now, the market has gone up. It has allowed my money to at least grow to keep up with debasement at this period in time. And hopefully it can continue. Probably won't forever. And so then we have to see what our monetary and fiscal policies will allow us to do. But we'll see. There's a lot of commercial real estate getting ready to be refinanced, and companies like WeWork with millions of square feet of commercial properties going bankrupt and stepping out of their leases. And people aren't paying rent. So we'll just see what happens. It's gonna be awesome.
Well, if you stay solvent yourself, you're going to at least have the opportunity to maybe get things on sale. Lawrence, thanks for your time. Thanks for everything you do for the military community. I'm going to have you back on for sure, because I love talking about this stuff. I can tell you do too. Where can people find you?
At Green Collar Finance on Instagram. I also have a website at greencollarfinance.com. Just come check me out. That's basically the biggest places that I actually am pretty active. I have a TikTok and such, but I like my Instagram. It's easier. It's easier.
Getting those youths.
I do dances and stuff. No, I'm just kidding. No, I don't do that crap.
He does. I've seen it. Yeah, you have to shield your eyes.
Different channel.
All right, dude. I'll keep you around after I end the recording. But those of you watching, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. I'll see you on the next one. If you guys have any questions for us too, make sure you drop them in the comments below, and then we'll address them next time we talk. Peace.